Mascot platformers are in a weird place for me. I didn't start playing games until the GameCube and PS2 days, so I definitely missed the early entries in the genre. And when I was a little girl, ignorant of so very many things, I generally didn't put much value in playing games from earlier generations, usually only playing ones that got remakes or remasters for systems that were the newest ones I owned at the time. Though I was obsessed with Sly Cooper and the Jack games were really fun, past that I'm pretty unfamiliar with the genre. So I might as well start figuring out how I feel about it. And I like dragons, so what better place to start than a cute purple dragon named Spyro. I'm Kalice, and I recommend Spyro the Dragon. Before we get too far along, I want to mention that this was the winner on a poll I ran over on Patreon a bit ago to determine some future content on the channel. It was a vote between the first 3 Spyro games and the Pikmin games, and Spyro won. Thank you to everyone who voted, so thanks Ash. And if you're interested in being involved in any future polls yourself, you can go check out my Patreon. Much like Mega Man, Spyro is a franchise that's in many ways been treated poorly for a number of years. Skylanders started as a Spyro spinoff, then kind of just wound up replacing the franchise for a rather long time. We only got the Reignited trilogy after the Toys to Life genre stopped being the most profitable thing ever, probably from market oversaturation, and only after that did rumblings of a new entry in the franchise start. As of the posting of this video, there still hasn't actually been confirmation of a new Spyro game beyond a couple of people saying that it's possible, which is kind of a bummer, honestly. Our setup and storyline here is rather simple, and unlike my Mega Man 1 video, I don't have comic books or extended info to talk about. So there's a news report happening, where a reporter is talking to an old, rather sleepy dragon about how peaceful the worlds are right now, while a certain adorable dragon plays in the background. But the reporter raises concerns about one nasty Gnorc, or Gnasty Gnorc, depending on your dialect. The camera starts to zoom out to Nasty watching the report on TV, just as another dragon comes in and starts talking trash about him. He gets angry and does some gem magic to turn the older dragons into crystal. Spyro, though, is fine for some reason. Spyro claims that he's now got some things to do, and then runs off, and boom, transition to gameplay. So as Spyro, you're supposed to go around and save all of the dragons who are trapped in crystal, and also probably burn a bunch of baddies who have conquered the worlds that the dragons were living in, and collect tons of stuff. This intro cutscene and the ending cutscene are the most the story ever really presents. There's a couple of dragons that mention some aspects of world building and further context, but it's honestly all pretty surface level stuff. It's rather simple, though I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I grinned at the intro cutscene, got a bit attached to Spyro from him playing around in the back, and I know what I'm supposed to be doing. As long as it's actually fun to do that thing, then this setup is more than enough as far as I'm concerned. Despite the bare bones story, the game is absolutely overflowing with personality all the time. Spyro's movements are expressive and kind of remind me of a cat. The visuals are colorful and well themed, and the enemy animations are highly varied and fun to see. Considering I said the words mascot platformer before, you probably accurately surmised that Spyro can jump. If you hit the jump button again while in the air, Spyro will start to glide. You can control the direction of that glide as Spyro inevitably heads towards the ground, or cancel out of it early at any time. It did take me a little bit to get used to, but once I did, it was a really fun way to get around. Felt good too. And it's rather unique compared to most other platformers. Spyro also has a brief fire breath attack, and can charge in a direction that you're moving. The charge is a faster way to get around, and also an attack, but is more difficult to control. Sparks, the dragonfly, flitters around Spyro and magically protects him from damage. Sparks can take 3 hits, changing colors with each point of damage. On PS4, your controller's light changes colors too, which is a cute touch. After the 3rd hit, he disappears, then Spyro can only take 1 more hit before death, which means a lost life. Yes, this game has lives. I never ran into problems with it. The game isn't particularly difficult most of the time, but if you find yourself getting low on lives and don't want to deal with the possible consequences of a game over, there are cheat codes to give you extra lives, so use one of those. Oh, also, small, innocent creatures can be mercilessly burnt to death. Doing so spawns a butterfly, which Sparks can eat to regain a hit point. You can also rarely get a life like this. If Sparks had disappeared, he'll fly back on screen to eat a butterfly. It made me feel bad to burn the cute little animals, but the presentation is cutesy and fun and lighthearted, so thankfully it didn't scar me. At least not too badly. The game is ultimately a collectathon. Everything that you do is meant to get you some kind of collectible. Touching one of the crystallized dragons frees them, then Spyro has a brief conversation with the older dragon that was freed. All of the dragons have unique designs and help further the theme of the locations that you're going to. They're all guys, which is lame, but I liked literally every single design. A fairy appears where the dragon once was after they just teleport away, and those locations now act as checkpoints. You can also talk to the fairy to replay the dragon dialogue if you'd like. Fairies are friends with dragons. I don't know why they are, but they are. There are also little thieves with stolen eggs that run away when you get near, so to get the eggs you have to chase them down, but the vast majority of what you'll be collecting is gems. Gems are scattered around the environment in various chests you can break open, and enemies that you kill for the first time drop them. I found going through all these varied levels collecting goodies to be super enjoyable. Collectibles that are placed specifically and don't repeat are way more fun to me than ones that repopulate. I like being able to feel like I've gotten all of them. All the sounds associated with collecting things are incredibly satisfying, especially the little... when Sparks zips over to grab a nearby gem. Also, yeah, Sparks grabs nearby gems, so you functionally have a magnetic area around you that attracts them. But Sparks is way cuter than a magnet, so I prefer him. Of course, if you've taken enough damage that he's disappeared, then he can't fly over and grab collectibles for you, which does feel kind of bad, actually. Sparks can start to fly in the direction of the nearest gems at the push of a button. I liked this a lot because it meant that if I missed anything, I didn't have to comb over the whole level again. Also, I had Lily here to help me out. You want to say hi to the people, Lily?
Hi to the people, Lily.
I'd advise not using the feature until you've already looked over the level at least once, but I thought finding the stuff without it was more fun. You do you, I guess. Though if you're not fond of tracking down collectibles, you're probably not going to be fond of what you're doing for the vast majority of the gameplay loop. Don't know what to tell you on that past not all games are made for all people. And that's okay. The basic structure of the game is that it's split into worlds, 5 normal ones and a 6th one with a bit of a different format. The normal worlds have a hub area complete with platforming, enemies, and collectibles with portals that lead to different levels. There's 3 normal levels, a flight level, and a boss level. I'll detail the differences between these in a bit. Each world has a theme that it adheres to that sort of highlights a different set of dragons, and I guess dragon society. There's artisans, peacekeepers, a very fancy name for warriors, magic crafters, beast makers, and dream weavers. In order to unlock later levels, you have to collect a certain number of collectibles, then someone will take Spyro in a hot air balloon to the new world. You can travel between all of your unlocked worlds at your leisure. Ultimately, there's still a lot of individual level themes that you'd see in other games, but it gives more creative freedom for the individual levels. For example, the Peacekeepers area is mostly desert themed, but there's also an ice level. Because I mean, why not? That still fits the theme of warriors just fine. The normal levels are just that, normal levels. This is where the bulk of the game takes place. Challenges from platforming and enemies will mostly come from these levels. The level design very much takes advantage of Spyro's moveset. Plenty of levels have more open areas to glide around, and even the less open levels tend to have a lot of path splits. This did a lot to set it apart from most other platformers I've played, while also making the process of getting all of the collectibles more enjoyable. The game definitely doesn't drag, and I felt like I was constantly exploring new and highly varied areas while contesting with new enemies. The minions of Nasty Nort come in plenty of varieties. They follow a few basic rules for how to deal with them. Most enemies can be dealt with either flames or by charging. Enemies with armor are immune to flames, and large enemies cannot be charged. With those basic rules established, the game consistently throws new and interesting enemy types at you. If a big enemy has armor over part of its body, you need to figure out where you can hit them with the flames or how you can make them vulnerable. Some enemies change states based on something happening in the environment, and some enemies can use the environment against you. Most of the enemies aren't particularly difficult to deal with, especially if you play aggressively, but the variety in both appearance and their tactics does go a long way towards keeping things interesting. There is one very notable exception in difficulty as far as I'm concerned, which is these fucking dog enemies that only appear in one level. They just attack really fast and aren't easy to avoid. In a harder game, they wouldn't be out of place, but for most of my time with Spyro, I was in a relatively chill state of mind, but these enemies actually kicked my ass a bit. They did make me finally understand what it's like to be on the other side of Sonic's homing attack, so that's a life experience I can now claim to have virtually experienced at least. So thanks for that. Also, the armored spiders are legitimately fucking terrifying. Certain levels have arrows on the ground. If you charge over them, Spyro will start to speed up into a supercharge, which is even harder to control than a normal charge. This ignores enemy immunities, allows you to destroy certain obstacles in the level so you can explore more, and jump massive distances to reach new parts of levels. This is the only aspect of the whole game that I just out and out do not enjoy. It's a decent enough idea, but I genuinely just don't think it feels good to control when any accuracy is required, which it very often is. Jumping to a far off point with it can be fun, but the exact route you need to follow for a jump isn't always clear. Never is this more noticeable than in what I consider to be the worst level of the game, treetops. Just fucking look at this ridiculous sequence of jumps you have to do to find everything in this level. There are 2 sequences like this for this level. They're not easy to do, and I genuinely don't know how I could have ever figured the routes out without Lily here to just tell me what to do. Thanks for that, Lily. You want to say hi again?
Hi again.
I'd very much advise looking up a guide for those. It's incredibly unintuitive design, and it's an unfortunately awful bit of a game that I otherwise had a wonderful time with. There's also a super flame that you can get. After rescuing fairies in certain levels, they give Spyro a smooch, and he enters a timed power-up state where his flames are powerful enough to destroy obstacles and ignore enemy immunities. First and foremost, I think this is an incredibly accurate portrayal of the feeling of being kissed by a cute girl. Also, Spyro looks fucking awesome while in this state. I wish there was a way to permanently unlock the look. Super fun mechanic. By the way, my favorite levels were Dark Passage because it had a really fun and clever gimmick, and Nork Cove because it had a really satisfying flow to it. The flight levels are sort of like mini-games. Spyro has actual flight in these because magic, and you're tasked with flying through certain objects, lighting certain objects, and or destroying certain things in a set period of time. There's a timer counting down, completing objectives adds varying amounts of time to it. You get gems for each set of objectives you complete, as well as for completing all of the objectives in a single run. Kinda reminds me of Tony Hawk in that, actually. Doing all of them in one run can be pretty tight time-wise, and I think it's a bit too fast-paced. But after I got used to the system, I did have some fun with it, though I did tend to do these levels first, just so I could get them out of the way. I just had more fun with the rest of the game for the most part. The boss levels are strange because they're, well, actual levels that just so happen to have a boss in them. Typically the boss will periodically show up throughout the level to attack you, then once you hit the boss, they'll run away. They're all pretty simple, but I enjoyed all of them with one very notable exception. Toasty's the fucking best, by the way. The game has a couple of skill points, which aren't really what they sound like. Basically, you get a point that unlocks some concept art for doing seemingly random things, reaching certain platforms, burning certain objects, or clearing bosses without getting hit. These feel very tacked on and are in fact an addition for the remaster, so that does make sense. I didn't really have fun with any of them, but a guide or someone who knows what to look for being there makes them easy enough. The art is nice though. The final world is pretty different from the 5 before it. The hub area is just a small circle, which is actually kind of disappointing. The levels have to be done in order, there's no flight levels, and there's only 2 normal levels before the boss level. And that boss level kind of sucks. Nasty is by far the worst boss in the game because he's basically just a glorified version of one of those egg thieves. He has some bits where he attacks you, but he mostly just runs away. He's fucking lame. There's also a bonus level that I won't spoil the gimmick of, but you have to collect all of the gems and eggs and free all of the dragons to access it. It's really fun. So what are the differences between the original PS1 version and the Reignited version? The most obvious thing is that everything in the Reignited version of 1 is much prettier. All of the models and visuals for the levels are vastly improved. More character and flavor was injected where it could be, while still being rather faithful to the original, as far as I can tell. Voice lines were re-recorded, Spyro comes off as a bit less cocky in Reignited. All of the dragons that you're saving were given unique designs with voices to fit them, though their dialogue remains the same as far as I know. In the original, the dragons all looked rather similar, with the major differences being their colors and that some of them stood on all four legs. Enemies have more animations, bosses are made a bit more threatening, apparently Jacques was a pushover in the original, and for the Reignited trilogy, controls were universalized between the three games. This is both a good thing and a bad thing. Movement in the original was more affected by the environment. The ground you were walking on would heavily affect momentum. Certain thieves were easier to catch because of this, while climbing up steep slopes was stupidly slow. Also, Spyro's jump out of a charge was super low and kind of terrible, and the left stick controls felt wonky because analog sticks were such a new addition of the PS1 at the time that it was a tacked on feature at the last moment. Analog sticks generally feel better for 3D movement than D-pads, so the remaster's general movement just feels better as far as I'm concerned. The flight levels are much more forgiving in the original, they're slower paced, your fire's hitbox is larger, and it lingers for longer, and you can get closer to the water without dying, so that's probably the one change that I'm not fond of. Well, that and the fact that they removed the bit between levels where your collected gems get added to a stockpile in a really satisfying way, that really should have made the cut. Don't know why it didn't. Also, Sparks couldn't point to the nearest treasure in the original. The music was all redone. Both versions are good on this as far as I'm concerned, and if you prefer the original soundtrack, you can easily switch to it from the options menu. I'm sure some diehard fans of the original will cry foul over the changes, but I think the remake feels way better in everything but the flight levels, and the added personality to the characters and enemies is a welcome change, so I say skip the PS1 version of 1 and play the Reignited version. That said, the Reignited versions of 2 and especially 3 have issues, but like I said before, those are topics for future videos. So, this little bit of Lily having recorded the PS1 footage for me was originally a relatively small but greatly appreciated favor. Some things happened, and I entirely lost the footage of my playthrough of Spyro 1 Reignited. Really not sure how that happened, but yeah. So she, wonderful, transcendent, lovely being that she is, did me a massive favor and played through the entire game 100% to re-record footage for me. She is much, much better at the game than me, so if you're seeing this gameplay and thinking, wow, Kalice is really good at this game, especially for having never played it before. Actually, that's Lily, and she has played it before, because she likes Spyro. Thank you, lots and lots and lots. Do you want to say anything more, Lily?
Life is suffering. Only Spyro. Always Spyro. Never free.
Alright! Thank you. Back to your regularly scheduled video. It's just really fun to be playing as a dragon, and a really cute one at that. And what you're doing as that dragon feels thematically appropriate. Flight is pretty much your best way to get around. Fire is one of your primary means of combat. Treasure is what you're collecting all the time. You're friends with a dragonfly. Okay, so maybe not all of it is traditional dragon lore, but dragonfly has dragon in the name, so it obviously makes perfect sense that they'd be friends with dragons. Yeah, that checks out. The music is good. It's fun and whimsical and matches the tone of the adventure, while further hammering home the theme of each world and level. The music changes dynamically depending on if you're standing still, running, or charging, which is really neat. I don't know how much more to say about it, but it gets a thumbs up from me. I mentioned before that there was a cheat code to give extra lives, which is cool and all, but there are also cheat codes for visual things, which is where the real action is. There's the classic big head mode, which I've never really understood the appeal of, and codes to change Spyro's color. Those unfortunately make him look like he's covered in paint. It would have been cool if these worked more like fighting game alt colors and gave him alternative color palettes. Still neat that they're there, and the most important cheat code of all, cool shades. You may have noticed that I use these for a good chunk of the game. The Switch version actually has Rainbow Pride shades, which I would have absolutely loved to use, but they're unfortunately version exclusives, for as far as I can tell, basically no reason. Happy Pride Month, Black Lives Matter. This fun adventure came to us originally by way of Insomniac Games, who would go on to create the next two Spyro games, Ratchet & Clank, Resistance, and more recently, Spider-Man. The Reignited trilogy was handled by Toys for Bob, who did the Skylanders games, and Sanzaru, who fucked up Sly 4. Ugh. Insomniac had input on the remaster, which is generally a good sign that it will be a rather faithful adaptation, which was true of the first game, and not very true of the other two. Again, future videos. Spyro the Dragon was the first game in what went on to be a rather prolific franchise that pretty much completely passed me by. I had a lot of fun with it. Most of the time that I was playing, I had joy in my heart and a smile on my face. It's good, simple fun. Now that I've experienced the first entry in its remastered form, I'm looking forward to checking out the second and third game, and I've already found myself hoping that the franchise will return at some point. Hopefully not be fucked up like Sly was. This has been Kalice. Thanks for watching. You can like the video, subscribe, or share this video around if you enjoyed it and want to. My Patreon exists if you'd like to support me. There's neat bonuses like my scripts and raw recording sessions, so feel free to go look at that. Speaking of, big thanks to all of my current patrons like Ash. Keep loving what you love, and I'll see you next time with something else.